My name is Margaret Elaine Calloway. I am 37 years old. And on the morning of March 14, 2023, my parents asked me to leave my grandmother's funeral before the casket was lowered into the ground. They did not raise their voices. My mother touched my elbow near the back pew of St. Catherine of Siena Catholic Church on Rosewood Avenue in Decatur, Georgia, and she said, quietly enough that no one else could hear, that it might be better if I stepped outside. My father stood 2 feet behind her with his hands folded at his waist and his eyes on the middle distance, the way he always looked when he had already decided something and was waiting for the room to catch up. I did not move. I want to be precise about that. I did not move and I did not lower my voice because I did not raise it. I simply stood in the third row from the back of that church on a Tuesday morning in March with the smell of stargazer lilies heavy in the air and the white casket of Dorothy Ann Calloway, my grandmother, visible from where I stood, and I said, "I'm her granddaughter. I'm not leaving." What my parents did not know not then was that a man in a gray suit was already standing near the side entrance of that church. His name was Thomas J. Abernethy. He was an estate attorney licensed in the state of Georgia since 1991. He had a sealed envelope in his inside jacket pocket, and he had been instructed by my grandmother in writing not to deliver it to anyone until I was present and the service was complete. This is the account of what happened. I am providing it in full. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories. This is where we share real-life inspired tales of family conflict, betrayal, and the quiet strength it takes to stand your ground. If these stories speak to you, drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. I am a licensed forensic accountant. I have held that certification since October 2014. I worked for 9 years at Harrigan, Boyle & Associates in Atlanta, Georgia, a firm specializing in financial investigations for civil litigation. I provide this information not to establish authority over my family members, but because it is relevant to understanding how I observed the events I am about to describe and what I was able to document and when. My grandmother, Dorothy Ann Calloway, was born on August 3, 1938 in Macon, Georgia. She died on March 11, 2023 at Emory University Hospital in Atlanta at 6:42. In the morning of cardiac arrest following a stroke she sustained 3 days earlier. She was 84 years old. She had been widowed since 1997 when my grandfather, Robert Calloway, died of pancreatic cancer. She had 2 children, my father, Gerald Calloway, born 1961, and my aunt, Patricia Calloway Hennessy, born 1964. My grandmother owned a house at 4419 Magnolia Trace Drive in Decatur, Georgia. She had lived there since 1974. The house was a 4-bedroom brick colonial on approximately a third of an acre. According to the Fulton County tax records I reviewed in January 2023, the assessed value of the property at that time was $612,000. The fair market value, based on comparable sales in the 30,030 zip code over the prior 12 months, was closer to $740,000. I knew that figure because I had looked it up. I had been looking things up for approximately 14 months by the time my grandmother died. Cooled and listening to her voice. She said, "Maggie, I need you to keep something for me." She used the name Maggie. She was the only person who called me that. My parents called me Margaret. My colleagues called me Margaret. My grandmother called me Maggie from the time I was born, and she had never once changed that. I said, "Of course, what is it?" She said, "Not on the phone. Can you come Sunday?" I said yes. I went to her house that Sunday, January 16, 2022. It was a cold morning, 34 degrees, with a thin glaze of ice on the driveway that she had not salted. She answered the door herself. She was wearing a dark green cardigan and her reading glasses pushed up on her head, and she looked to me exactly as she always had, sharp and tidy and careful in her movements. We sat at her kitchen table and she made coffee and she put a white legal envelope in front of me and said, "I want you to hold on to this, put it somewhere safe, don't tell your father." I picked up the envelope. It was sealed. My name was written on the front in her handwriting, which was precise and old-fashioned, the kind of penmanship they taught in Georgia schools in the 1940s. Beneath my name she had written, "To be opened only in the presence of Thomas Abernethy." I looked at her. She was looking at her coffee cup. She turned it slightly on the saucer, just a quarter turn, her thumbnail tracing the rim, and she said, There are some things I should have done differently. I am trying to do them right now while I still can. I put the envelope in my bag. I brought it home to my apartment in Midtown Atlanta. I put it in the fireproof lockbox I kept in my bedroom closet behind a box of winter sweaters. That was January 16, 2022. My grandmother did not explain more that morning, and I did not ask her to. I knew my grandmother. She was not a woman who said things twice or said things early. When she was ready to tell me more, she would tell me more. But I began paying attention differently after that. This is what I do professionally, paying attention differently. I look at numbers and patterns and timelines, and I find where they do not line up. I do not look for drama, I look for discrepancy. What I began noticing in the months after that January morning was a pattern of small financial transfers that I had not noticed before, because I had not been looking. My grandmother had always managed her own finances. She had a checking account and a money market account at SunTrust, which became Truist after the 2019 merger. She had a brokerage account at Fidelity that held approximately $280,000 in index funds and dividend-paying stocks as of December 2021, the last time she had shared a statement with me, which she did periodically because she trusted my professional opinion on whether her allocations made sense. I am not her financial advisor. I want to be clear about that. I never held that role formally. She simply showed me her statements sometimes, the way a person shows a family member who happens to know something about a subject. I looked them over and told her what I thought. In February 2022, she sent me a Fidelity statement for January. I looked it over. The balance had dropped from $280,000 to $200,000. She said my father How much did he take? She was quiet for a moment, then she said $40,000. He said he would pay it back. My father was not a man who paid things back. I knew that because I was 12 years old the first time I heard my grandmother say the phrase quietly to my grandfather on the back porch of the house on Magnolia Trace Drive. I was supposed to be inside watching television. I was sitting on the porch steps in the dark, the way children do when adults don't realize they are there. My grandfather said, "He'll pay it back." My grandmother said, "Gerald has never paid anything back in his life, Robert, and you know it." I did not say any of that to her in February 2022. I said, "Did he have you sign anything?" She said he had me sign a form. He said it was for the bank. I said, "What kind of form?" She said she wasn't sure. She thought it might have been something about the account beneficiary. My stomach dropped and stayed there for the rest of that call. I want to be exact about what I did next and when because the timeline matters. On February 18, 2022, I began a file. I kept it on a password-protected external drive, not on my work computer and not on any cloud server. I labeled it simply DCA for Dorothy Calloway. Into that file I put every document, every statement, every piece of correspondence I received from or about my grandmother's finances from that point forward. I also at that time looked up Thomas J. Abernethy. He was easy to find. He had a solo practice on Commerce Drive in Decatur. His Georgia bar number was 2847. He had been licensed since 1991, as I noted. His practice areas were listed as estate planning, probate, and elder law. He had no disciplinary history. His Martindale-Hubbell rating was AV preeminent, which is the highest rating available. I did not call him. My grandmother had not told me to call him. The envelope said to open it in his presence. I took that instruction literally, which is the only sensible way to take a written instruction. Instead, I continued to pay attention. March through June of 2022, my father borrowed an additional $55,000 from my grandmother in 3 separate transfers. I know the amounts and the dates because she eventually sent me the statements herself, in paper form in a plain envelope with no note inside. I understood this to mean she was showing me because she needed someone to know and she could not make herself say it out loud again. The 3 transfers were $18,000 on March 4, $22,000 on April 17, and $15,000 on June 9. All were listed on the Fidelity statements as redemptions. All were consistent with a pattern of someone being asked to liquidate holdings periodically. I added each statement to the DCA file. My Aunt Patricia Patricia was not involved in these transactions as far as I could determine. Patricia lived in Savannah with her husband Dennis Hennessy, who taught high school history at Savannah Arts Academy. They were comfortable but not wealthy. Patricia called my grandmother every Sunday. I had observed this consistently. She did not ask her for money, to my knowledge. My father, on the other hand, had a landscaping company called Callaway Green Services that he had started in 2009, and that had been in full for more or less than 10 years since 2017. I did not pry further at that time. He had not asked for my professional opinion and I did not offer it. But I was not surprised in 2022 to see where the money was going. In August 2022, something shifted. My mother called me on August 14. She said that my grandmother was having some trouble with her memory and that they, meaning she and my father, were taking a more active role in helping manage things. She said this in a pleasant, matter-of-fact tone, the kind of tone she used when she had decided something was already settled. She said they had arranged for some of the household bills to be redirected to a joint account that my father had opened with my grandmother to make it easier to keep track of things. I said, "Did Grandma want to do that?" My mother said it was her idea, actually. I said, "Can I talk to her about it?" My mother said, "Of course, she's right here." There was a pause and then my mother said, still into the phone, "She's resting, actually. She dozed off, I'll have her call you." My grandmother did not call me that day. She called me 3 days later on August 17. She sounded exactly like herself. She told me she had made a peach cobbler. She asked about a case I had been working on. She said my name, Maggie, at least 4 times in the first 2 minutes, which was not unusual. She always said my name when she was glad to talk to me. I said, "Mom says you're having some memory trouble." There was a pause, then she said, "Your mother has an active imagination." I wrote that down verbatim in the DCA file. I wrote the date and the time and the exact words. The joint account my mother had described was opened on August 8, 2022, at the Truist branch on Church Street in Decatur. I know this because my grandmother sent me a copy of the account opening documents in September. Again, no note, just the documents in a plain envelope. The account required 2 signatures to open, but only 1 to withdraw. My father's name was listed as a co-owner, not an authorized signer. There is a legal distinction. A co-owner has full ownership rights to any funds in the account. An authorized signer can only act on the owner's behalf. The distinction matters enormously in estate law. I added the documents to the DCA file. In September, October, and November of 2022, there were 11 withdrawals from the joint account totaling $34,700. I could not verify the purpose of each withdrawal. I did not have full access to the account records, but I had the opening documents and I had the statement my grandmother forwarded to me in December, and the pattern was visible. Withdrawals, irregular amounts, irregular intervals, no corresponding deposits from any external source. My father was running his company's operating expenses through his elderly mother's joint account. I want to be precise. I did not have evidence sufficient to establish that as a legal conclusion at that time. I had evidence sufficient to establish it as a hypothesis that I was going to continue to investigate. I called Thomas Abernethy's office on December 2, 2022. His paralegal answered. I said I was the granddaughter of a client and that I had a question about procedure, not about the substance of any documents. The paralegal put me on hold. After Mr. Abernethy procedural question. If a client has given a family member an envelope with instructions that it be opened in your presence and that family member has concerns about the client's welfare, what is the appropriate course of action? There was a pause of perhaps 5 seconds. Then he said, the appropriate course of action would be for that family member to do nothing that would alarm the client's immediate household, and to be patient, and to be available. I said, understood. He said, is there anything else I can help you with today, Ms. Calloway? I said no, thank you for your time. We hung up. I sat at my kitchen table in my apartment with my hands flat on the table in front of me for a long time after that call. The afternoon light was moving across the floor and I watched it move. I thought, she has already done what she needed to do. Whatever is in that envelope, she planned this. I just have to be here. That is all I thought. I did not let myself think anything else. My grandmother had a second stroke on March 8, 2023. My father called me that evening. He said she was at Emory University Hospital and that it was serious and that he would keep me updated. He did not say I should come. He did not say don't come either. He said he would keep me updated. I drove to Emory University Hospital that night. I arrived at 9:15 p.m. My father and mother were in the family waiting room on the fourth floor. My father looked at me when I came in. He did not say anything for a moment. Then he said, "You didn't need to drive all the way over here." I said I wanted to be here. My mother said she's resting, they've sedated her. I sat in one of the chairs along the wall. I stayed until 2 a.m. My parents went home at midnight. I stayed another 2 hours. A nurse named Denise, whose last name I do not know, came out twice and told me there was no change and that I should try to get some rest. I thanked her. I did not leave until 2 a.m. I drove home. I went into my bedroom closet and I took out the fireproof lockbox and I held it in my hands for a moment. I did not open it. I put it back. I went to bed. My grandmother died on March 11, 2023 at 6:42 in the morning. My father called me at 7:05. He said, "Mom's gone." He said it evenly, the way he said most things. I said, "I'm so sorry, Dad." He said, "The funeral will be Tuesday. St. Catherine's, I'll send you the details." I said, "Of course." I called Thomas Abernethy's office at 9:00 a.m. His paralegal said he was unavailable. I left my name and number. At 11:30 a.m., he called me back. He said he was aware of Dorothy Calloway's passing and that he would be at St. Catherine of Siena Catholic Church on Rosewood Avenue on Tuesday, March 14. He said he would find me. I said, "Thank you." He said, "I am sorry for your loss, Ms. Calloway." I said, "Thank you, Mr. Abernethy." The funeral was at 10 o'clock in the morning on March 14, 2023. I arrived at St. Catherine's at 9:30. The church was a small one, brick, built in 1962 with a white interior and dark wooden pews. There were perhaps 60 people there by the time the service began. My grandmother had lived in Decatur for nearly 50 years. She had known most of the The service lasted approximately 50 minutes. Father Dominic, who had been the priest at St. Catherine's for 11 years, conducted it. He spoke about my grandmother's consistency and her generosity and her particular love of a well-organized kitchen. That last detail was exact and specific and true, and it made the tightness behind my sternum worse for a moment before it eased. As Father Dominic gave his final blessing, my mother appeared at my elbow. She was wearing a black dress and pearl earrings, and her expression was the one I had known my entire life, the expression she wore when she had decided something and was presenting the decision as if it were a courtesy rather than an instruction. She said quietly, with the organ beginning the recessional behind her, "Margaret, I think it might be better if you headed on. There's no need for you to go to the cemetery. We'll keep it to immediate family." I am immediate family. I did not say that. I said I'm going to the graveside. My mother's jaw tightened slightly. She said, "Your father feels it would be less complicated." I said, "I'm sure he does." She said, "Margaret." I said, "I'm her granddaughter. I'm not leaving." My mother looked at me for a moment. Then she turned and moved back toward the front of the church. My father, who had apparently been watching from the end of the front pew, caught her eye when she returned to him. They had a conversation with their faces that took approximately 2 seconds. I had seen that conversation my entire life. I looked away. That was when I saw Thomas Abernethy. He was standing near the side entrance of the church, to the left of the baptismal font, in a gray suit with a white shirt and a dark blue tie. He was perhaps 65 years old, with silver hair and the kind of posture that suggested he had been standing in churches and courtrooms for so long that standing up straight required no effort. He was not looking at me. He was looking at the front of the church, where my parents were gathered with the family. He had an inside breast pocket that was slightly more full than it should have been. I understood what that meant. The congregation began moving toward the exits. I stood where I was. Thomas Abernethy moved through the dispersing crowd with the unhurried precision of a man who knew exactly where he was going and had been waiting calmly to go there. He stopped in front of me. He said, "Ms. Calloway," he extended his hand. I shook it, his grip was firm and brief. He said, "I believe you have something for me, and I have something for you." I had brought the envelope. I had taken it from the lockbox the night before and put it in my purse. I took it out now and handed it to him. He looked at it. He turned it over once. He said, "She sealed this herself, you know. She used a little sponge. She told me that she didn't like the taste of envelope glue." Something in my chest moved. I did not say anything. He said, "Shall we step outside?" We walked out the side entrance. The March morning was pale and cool, about 52 degrees. There was a cemetery adjacent to the church, older stones in the back, newer ones toward the front, the open grave visible at the far end, with the green tent erected over it, and the folding chairs and the gathered family beginning to arrange themselves. My parents were walking toward it. My Aunt Patricia looked back once toward the church. She saw me and Abernethy standing outside. She stopped for a moment. Her husband touched her arm. She turned back. Abernethy opened the envelope carefully. He removed two documents. He held them in a way that allowed me to see them without contact. The first was a two-page document. 29 days after she had called me at 7:18 in the morning and asked me to come Sunday. The second document was a single page. It was handwritten, in my grandmother's precise, old-fashioned script. I will describe what it said in a moment. First, I want to describe what I felt when I saw her handwriting on that page, because I have been precise about dates and figures and legal distinctions throughout this account, and I want to be equally precise about this. When I saw those letters on that page, the exact way she made her capital M, the way she always curved the tail of her lowercase g, something behind my sternum opened like a window that had been painted shut for a long time. I stood very still and I breathed. Then I read it. Have you ever been the person in your family who everyone thinks is doing fine, so no one worries about you? Have you ever been the one who is never asked what you need because you are so clearly capable of managing things yourself? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one, and if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time, because what happens next is the part I've been building toward this whole time. My grandmother's handwritten letter was addressed to me by name. It was dated January 15, 2022, the day before I came to her house. I am going to transcribe it here in full, because it is a document that belongs in this account in its entirety, and because every sentence she wrote matters, and because she wrote it knowing I would read it someday, and she meant it to be read exactly as she wrote it. She wrote, "Maggie, if you are reading this, Tom has done his job and you have done yours, which means you stayed. I knew you would stay. You have always stayed. That is one of the things I have loved most about you, that you stay. I am going to tell you some things now, and I want you to hear them the way I would say them if I were sitting across the table from you with coffee in front of us. First, the house. I am leaving the house to you, not to your father, not to Patricia, though Patricia will receive her share of the financial accounts, which I will explain to Tom separately. The house is yours. It has been yours in my mind since you were 12 years old and you sat at my kitchen table doing algebra homework and told me you were going to do something that required a lot of careful thinking, and then you did it. Your father will not be pleased. He has been expecting the house, and I have allowed him to keep expecting it because I did not want to have the argument while I was still alive to have it. That is a failure on my part. I am sorry for it. But I also know your father, and I know that if I had told him, he would have spent the remaining time finding ways around it, and I did not want to spend whatever time I have left in that particular fight. The reason I am leaving you the house and not your father is not a small reason. It is not sentiment, though I am sentimental about you. It is because over the last several years your father has made certain financial decisions using my resources without asking me in any meaningful way, in a manner that tells me that what he sees when he looks at this house is a number. I do not want this house to become a number. I want it to become whatever you decide to make it, that is all. Second, the lockbox. If you have brought the envelope, and you have, because you are organized and you were raised right, even if your father and I had different ideas about what raised right means, then Tom will have everything he needs to proceed. Third and last, I want to tell you that I know it has not been easy, being on the outside of this family the way you have been. I know what it costs to be a person who pays attention and says nothing always. I know because I did it for 4 years with your be there after I wasn't. Take care of the kitchen. The handles on the upper cabinets need tightening. Oh, my love. Dorothy. I stood with that letter in the pale March morning for a period of time I cannot precisely estimate. Thomas Abernethy stood beside me. He did not speak. He was, I understood, a man who knew when silence was the correct professional response to a situation. When I was ready, I folded the letter along its original creases and held it. Abernethy said, "The will is already filed with the Fulton County Probate Court, filing number 2023 P04471. The filing date is March 12, 2023, one day after her death. She prearranged the filing with my office in February 2022. I said she planned ahead. He said she was a thorough woman. I said she was. He said I should tell you that I expect your father will contest. The will is sound. Georgia law requires clear and convincing evidence to establish undue influence or lack of testamentary capacity, and your grandmother's documentation of her own decision-making process is extensive. She left written explanations for every bequest. She had a capacity evaluation performed by Dr. Renee Washington at Emory in March 2022, a month and a half after she executed the will. The results are on file. The evaluation found no cognitive impairment. I said she thought of everything. He said she thought of a great deal. There was a pause. Somewhere across the cemetery, I could hear the low voice of Father Dominic beginning the graveside rites. Abernethy said, "Ms. Calloway, there is one additional matter." I looked at him. He said, "The joint account your father opened with your grandmother in August 2022. Depending on the documentation you may have gathered regarding the withdrawals from that account, there may be additional legal avenues worth exploring. Georgia has a financial exploitation statute, OCGA Section 35(8), that is relevant to situations involving vulnerable adults. I am not telling you what to do, I am telling you that the option exists." I said, "I have documentation." He said, "I assumed you might." I said, "I have statements covering 11 months. I have the account opening documents. I have a log of communications. I have statements she forwarded to me covering the fidelity withdrawals from February through November of 2022. The total, including the joint account withdrawals and the fidelity redemptions, comes to approximately $129,700 over the period from February 2022 through the time I stopped receiving statements in January 2023. Abernethy was quiet for a moment. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a business card. He held it out to me. He said, "Call my office Monday morning. I would like to have a more detailed conversation." I took the card. I walked to the graveside then. The chairs were arranged in 2 rows around the green tent and the open grave. The casket, white with a spray of stargazer lilies on the top, was positioned on the lowering device above the grave. Most of the people who had been in the church were there, standing in a loose half-circle behind the chairs. My parents were in. First row of chairs, Patricia and Dennis were beside them. My father saw me approach. He watched me walk toward the center and take my place standing in the middle of the table. Father came over and opened the door. He said the words about returning to the earth from which we came. He said the words about resurrection and hope. He said a prayer in which he mentioned Dorothy by name twice, and the second time my mother's shoulders shook once and then were still. When the service concluded, people began to move, speaking in low voices, touching each other's arms and shoulders. My Aunt Patricia came to me. She put her hands on both sides of my face, which she had not done since I was a child, and she said, "She loved you so much." I did not trust myself to speak, so I nodded. She dropped her hands, and Dennis was there, and they moved away. My father came to me last. He was alone. My mother had moved toward a cluster of neighbors. He stood in front of me with his hands at his sides, and he looked at me, and I could see something moving through his face that he was working to control. He said, "Your mother thought it would be easier." I said, "I know." He said she was trying to simplify things. I said, "I know that too, Dad." He looked at me for a moment. He looked past me toward the grave where the cemetery workers were preparing to lower the casket. He said, "She was my mother." I said she was mine too, in the way that matters. He did not answer that. He looked at the grave again. He put his hands in his pockets. After a moment, he walked away. I want to be precise about the resolution, because that precision is the point of everything I have described. On March 18, 2023, I met with Thomas Abernethy at his office at 302 Commerce Drive in Decatur at 9:00 in the morning. I brought the external drive with the DCA file. His paralegal, a woman named Susan, made copies of every document while we met. The meeting lasted 2 hours and 14 minutes. At that meeting, Abernethy confirmed the following. My grandmother's will was valid and filed. The Fulton County Probate Court had accepted it. The estate included the house at 4419 Magnolia Trace Drive, valued at $740,000 per appraisal. It included a Fidelity brokerage account with a remaining balance of $94,000 to be divided equally between my father and my Aunt Patricia, $47,000 each. It included a truist savings account containing $12,400, also to be divided equally. It included personal property, furniture, and household goods, to be divided per a handwritten list my grandmother had prepared and attached to the will, which assigned specific items to specific people with the same thoroughness she had applied to everything else in her life. The house came to me, free and clear, with a current fair market value of $740,000, with the original mortgage having been paid off in 2001, with no liens or encumbrances. Regarding the financial exploitation matter, on April 3, 2023, Abernethy filed a complaint on my behalf with the Georgia Division of Aging Services and simultaneously sent a letter to my father's attorney, a man named Philip Cross of Cross in Stanton in Atlanta, outlining the documentation we had gathered and the potential applicability of OCGA Section 35(8). The letter noted that the total documented withdrawals from my grandmother's accounts during the period in question amounted to $129,700, and that a forensic accounting examination of the Callaway Green Services business records might establish additional connections. On June 14, the remaining $97,700 is subject to a promissory note with a personal property lien against his company's equipment. My father did not contest the wills. I want to say one more thing about my father before I close this account, because precision requires it. My father is not a monster. He is a man who grew up watching his mother be generous and who learned over a long time and without ever fully examining it that her generosity was a resource to be drawn from rather than a quality to be honored. He did not decide to do harm. He decided not to look closely at what he was doing, which is a different kind of failure, but it is a failure nonetheless. I do not have a relationship with him in the traditional sense anymore. We speak occasionally. At Christmas, I called him and we talked for 11 minutes about weather and the Braves, and he asked how the house was, and I told him the kitchen cabinet handles had needed tightening, but that I had taken care of them. He laughed once, short sound, and said, "Of course you did." I do not know what he meant by that. I let it be. I moved into the house at 4419 Magnolia Trace Drive in August 2023. It took me 3 months after the estate was settled to close the paperwork and clean out my apartment and arrange the logistics. The house smelled like her, not perfume or cleaning products, just her particular smell, which I cannot describe except to say that it was warm and slightly floral and precise, the same way she was. That smell lessened over the weeks as I lived there and opened windows and brought in my own things. I expected that to feel like a loss. It did not feel like a loss. It felt like one thing ending and another beginning, which is what it was. I still have her handwritten letter. I put it in the fireproof lockbox, which now sits on the shelf above my desk in what used to be her study and is now mine. The lockbox no longer holds the sealed envelope because that is gone, opened, delivered, used for its exact intended purpose. Now it holds the letter and a few other things. A photograph of her and my grandfather in 1968, before either of my father or Patricia were born, standing in front of a different house somewhere in Macon, young and squinting into the sunlight. A recipe card in her handwriting for the peach cobbler. A note I wrote to her when I was 7 years old that she apparently kept, which says in my 7-year-old handwriting, "Dear Grandma Dorothy, I think you are the smartest person. Love, Maggie." I did not know she had kept that note. I found it in the small wooden box on her dresser when I was sorting through her room. I stood in that room with the September light coming through the curtains and I held it. I did not know until that moment how long I had been holding my shoulders up. They came down about 2 inches and they stayed down. This account is addressed to Dorothy Ann Callaway, who who was born in Macon, Georgia on August 3, 1938, and who died in Atlanta, Georgia on March 11, 2023, and who made sure with the thoroughness that defined every aspect of her life that someone would still be standing at her grave when the prayers were said and the ground received her. I was there, Dorothy. I stayed. I am taking care of the kitchen. The handles are tight. The cobbler recipe is on the refrigerator door. The light comes through the window over the sink the same way it always did, and in the mornings I stand there with my coffee and I look out at the yard and at the tulip poplar in the Georgia. August 2023.